Well, we're starting a brand new series today. It's going to be a four-part series from now until the end of August, and we're titling the series "I'm In," and I'll explain what that means and why we're titling that here in a second. When I finished college, I moved to Louisville, Kentucky to go to seminary. And so I showed up to Kentucky and didn't have any friends, didn't really know anybody. And that's a weird place to be when you show up somewhere and you're the new guy on the block and you don't know anybody. Well, it turns out there are other people in the same boat, people who had moved there for school. And we decided, hey, what if we just get together, let's go grab some pizza and then explore the town and see what the town has to offer. So a handful of us went out to get pizza. And as we're eating and getting ready to go explore the town, a torrential downpour happens. Now, I'm not talking about it was raining heavy. I'm talking you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. And so with that happening, there was no way we could drive anywhere. There's no way we could go anywhere. And so I'm sitting in the car with a group of people that I don't know very well. And someone goes, "We should go run through the streets." And I don't know, like, how serious is this person? Like, I don't know, how adventurous is this person? Well, little known fact about me, when I was in college, I actually did a lot of singing, songwriting, and playing shows. And I had a saying that me and some buddies lived by. We said, let's live life and write a song about it. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, let's live life and write a song about it. This would be great. But as a guy, you don't want your wallet to get wet. I don't know if guys wear wallets anymore, but I do. All right, and so a leather wallet, if it gets wet, it's done for. It no longer functions like it needs to function. It's weird. It soaks your money. You don't want it to get wet. And so knowing that was the thing holding me back, I took out my wallet and I put it emphatically on the dashboard as a way of saying, I'm in. And one by one, everyone else in the car began to take out or off items they didn't want to get wet, and in the like manner, they put them on the dashboard, and we opened the doors and took off running like idiots. I mean, we took off running like kids in the summer with a hose and a sprinkler. We just took off running through the streets, jumping in puddles, jumping into fountains, sliding through grass. But it was the time of our lives. It made an incredible memory. It bonded us as friends. And I look back at that and I think, man, that was such a fun night, a fun time. And I say that because there's this moment of, I'm in. And when we all said that we were in and we opened the doors, it opened us up to growing closer to each other, but also to having the time of our lives. Well, for the next few weeks, what I want to do is I want to show you where are we going as a church? What are we going to be about? Not just for this season, but for many years to come. And my hope is that as we get through this series, as you hear who we are as a church and what we are going to run after for the years and years and years ahead of us, I want you to know whether or not you're in. And my hope is, my hope is that at the end of the series that you will put your wallet, so to speak, on the dashboard and say, hey, I believe God is working in and through this church and I want to be a part of it. Or you might very well say, hey, that's just not for me. And that's totally fine. But I'd love for you to figure that out. Instead of just hanging around for a couple of years and be like, I don't like this church. Like, figure it out and be like, but my hope is at the end of the series, we will either say, I'm in or I'm out. But for those who are in, I promise you, the doors are about to open. We're about to take off running. And I truly believe we're entering into a season where we are going to have the time of our lives working alongside God and what he is doing. All right, so before we break down kind of what that looks like, where we're going, which is going to be, it's about knowing God and becoming like Jesus and helping others to do the same, I want to call us as a church to a fast. All right, and so we did this back in May, and there were different responses. When I talked about fasting, some people had an incredible experience. It was awesome because after the fast ended, when someone walks up to you and they go, when's the next one? You're thinking, we did this right. Like something went right. The fact that someone's like, let's do it again. Other people were like, Jeff, it felt like you handed me a Scantron and put me through a test that I did not study for. The whole time I was like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. This is weird. I think I broke it. Like, I don't know what's happening here. And then a lot of other people said, I just didn't do it. I felt like you kind of sprung it on us one Sunday. I didn't have time to think about it. I didn't even know what it was. And so honestly, I didn't do it. And so I want us to be like that first group. I want us to figure out and to know fasting in such a way that it becomes not I have to do this or this is awkward, but where you finish it and your response is, when will we do it again? And so to get there, for us to know what it's like to fast as a desire, we have to have clarity. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what fasting is not, what fasting is, why we do it, and then how we do it. And we might even just do a Q&A at the end. We might just say, let's just open up for questions because I really want us to make sure there's complete clarity on fasting before we leave this morning, because it's going to help us launch into a preparation period for a season that I believe is going to be years and years and years in the making of us being a part of what God's doing in and through this church. All right, so Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 16. In the middle of Jesus's most famous sermon, he's talking about prayer, and then he begins to talk about fasting. And he says this, he says, "And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may be not seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you." All right, and so as we read these verses, the first thing I want you to see is in verse 16, it says, "And when you fast." Not if you fast, but when. As in the same way that back in verse 5, it says, "And when you pray." In the same way that we should have rhythms of prayer in our life, we should do the work of having rhythms of fasting, not as an option to our faith, but as part of our faith. There's an expectation, and when you fast. All right, and so if we're going to do that, all right, if we're going to fast as a rhythm of life, we need to know a couple of things. So the first thing I want to explore is what fasting is not, okay? What fasting is not. So first, fasting is not a diet. All right, sometimes you'll hear about intermittent fasting and how it can accelerate fat loss, and you're thinking, I want to get some six-pack abs before we're entering bulking season, by the way. So summer is over, but when summer's approaching, people are like, I want to fast. I want to intermittent fast. Let me try this. Let me explore this. I've got a little eating window, and if I do this, I can accelerate fat loss and I can look better. Like Men's Health said to do it. Let's roll with it. But this is not a diet. Another thing is sometimes people fast for the mental benefit of it, and it's more of a challenge. And I'll say this, fasting is not a challenge. All right? This isn't about having the mental grit to push through to get to the end. And that's how some people have treated it. It's like, I can do this. I can mentally grit through it. I can be mentally tough. I can be like Dave Goggins, like, let's stay hard. Let's do that. And for other people, it's more of the challenge. And what we're talking about here is not a challenge. I'm not doing a 21-day challenge for Redeemer when it comes to fasting. Now, does fasting have physical benefits? Does it have mental benefits? Yeah. But the purpose of spiritually fasting is much greater than that. Okay, so if that's what fasting is not, then what is fasting? So here's my working definition today. Fasting is abstaining from something you physically want, so you're drawn deeper into what you spiritually need. Right? So that will be our working definition. Fasting is abstaining from something you physically want, so you are drawn deeper into what you spiritually need. In short, fasting is a way to seek more of God, to seek more of His strength, to seek more of His wisdom, to seek more of His favor. It's positioning yourself in a way that you're like, I want more of you. I want more of the Father. I want more of the Son. I want more of the Spirit. I want more of you, God. And fasting is a way for us to seek that. Right? So when we fast, you might be asking the question like, well, why do we fast? And so we kind of have the general reason. It's positioning ourselves to be deeper in what we spiritually need. But there are some more specific reasons to fast. And so I want to work through a little list here that can help you kind of understand as you work through Scripture and you see people fasting, what is the reason behind it? Because there's not like a one size fits all type menu here. There's different things. In one sense, we fast for deliverance from sin. So for some people, like, hey, there is a sin in my life that I've been given freedom over. Like the chains have been broken. I should be walking in freedom that shouldn't have a stronghold over me. But for you, it's like it's grabbing hold of your ankle again and it's trying to pull you back. And you're sitting there going, this feels like a part of my life that I can't break free from. And you're like, I need deliverance from sin. And so something you might do is you would fast for a deliverance from that sin that's trying to destroy you. And kind of an example of this scripturally would be the story of Esther. One of my favorite books of the Bible, but Queen Esther, she is the queen to the Persian king, King Xerxes. And while she's sitting at the throne doing queen things, this guy named Haman he's like Hitler. And that's not a embellishing of the story. He is working behind the scenes to have every Jewish person within the Persian kingdom to be completely annihilated. Right? So he's working behind the scenes. He gets a decree to be put in place that on one day, they're going to kill every Jew that is alive. Okay, so word gets to Esther about this, and her uncle Mordecai goes, you should go to the king and tell him to stop it. And there's one problem. The king doesn't know that she's Jewish. All right, and so for her, she knows if I approach the king, one, it risks my life. You don't just walk into the king's chambers. I mean, he could just remove me like he did to King Vashti. He could take my life. And so this could go badly. But Mordecai says, what if you were put in this position for a time like this? And so what does she do? She calls for a fast. She personally fasts and basically saying if I perish, I perish. But through that fast, she approaches the king and asks for him to save her people, okay? To save her people. Now, for her, that which tried to destroy her was a physical power. It was the power of Haman and the power of people like him. But for us, what's trying to destroy us isn't people, but sin. Sin has a desire to seek and to destroy us. And so if sin is knocking at our door, if sin is trying to destroy your life, and it's like grabbing hold of you, you might fast for the purpose of seeking deliverance from sin. Another reason to fast would be for God's favor when faithfulness is hard. Okay? We live in a world where there are so many things that want you to compromise who you are in Christ. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, my senior year of high school, I gave my life to ministry, and my pastor said, you need to go to a Christian college to get a Bible degree. And I chose to go to a state school instead. I said, look, it's not the well that need a doctor, but the sick. I think I'm going to go to a state school. That was my personal conviction. So I went to a state school, but there were so many things that could have derailed me. Right? And so how do you seek, God, I want to be faithful to you in an environment that's hostile towards you, right? So for some, it could be school. For others, it's the workplace. I mean, how many gray areas in the business world are you tempted to walk in? Or how many wrong things are you tempted to do because it could help you get ahead? It's even to remain faithful in the business world. There's 1,000 illustrations of this. But thinking about Daniel, right? So Daniel was this handsome, young, smart Israelite who was brought into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar, right? So he's brought to Babylon, and they castrate him, they strip away his name and give him a different identity, and they try to completely indoctrinate him with Babylonian things so that he would forget his Jewishness. They're trying to remove him from following God to follow Nebuchadnezzar or to follow other gods. And so Daniel, knowing this, says, God, how am I going to be faithful to you in the midst of this environment that's hostile towards you? And so he does what's called the Daniel fast. And he only eats vegetables instead of the king's food. And he does this for 10 days, which is not enough time to transform your body, right? But what it does, because it's something supernatural behind it, is God uses his diet to give him favor before the king. And so when the king sees him and that he's better than any other person, he's allowed to continue to be faithful to his God, right? And so he fasts for favor, to be faithful in an environment that's hostile towards them. So for you, maybe you're starting another semester at school and you're sitting there going I don't want to compromise my faith. I want to be faithful. You might fast for that. Or maybe you're in a certain position within your career and you realize you're tempted to compromise who you are in Christ to try to get ahead. And maybe you would fast and say, God, I need your favor so that I can stay faithful to you in this season. But for some people, they fast to find favor, when faithfulness is hard. Other people fast in Scripture for a deeper devotion. This is what would be called the Nazirite vow. So you see this in Numbers 6. You see people like Samuel took the Nazirite vow. John the Baptist took the Nazirite vow. Those are good examples. Samson also was a Nazirite. Not a good example, all right? But hey there, Delilah, what's it like? All that to say, the Nazirite vow, so here's what's cool. Israel's made up of 12 tribes, all right? There's one tribe that all the priests come from. Does anybody know what tribe that is? Levites, all right? People are don't quiz me, Jeff, right? All right, so the Levites. So every priest was a Levite. They came from that tribe. So for people who were set apart for being completely devoted to God's work, you basically had to be a Levite. If you weren't a Levite, you couldn't be a priest. And if you weren't a priest, then how are you to set your life aside or apart to be fully dedicated to God's work, right? Well, that's where they inserted the Nazirite vow. The Nazirite vow was a way for someone who wasn't a Levite to say, even though I'm not part of this tribe, I still want to, for a season of life, to be fully dedicated to your service. And so they would take this vow where they wouldn't eat certain things, they wouldn't cut their hair, there's some other things they'd abstain from, but it was a way of saying, like, for a season, I want to be fully dedicated to your service. And so some people would say, like, hey, I want to go deeper for a season. So it'd be kind of like a fasting for the purpose of being more devoted to God. In Acts chapter 9, you see Paul fasting for healing. In 1 Samuel 7, you see fasting for revival. And so there's many reasons that people fast for, but there's one I want to drill down on today. Another reason for fasting is to seek God's power for God's work, right? Another reason for fasting is to seek God's power for God's work. So if you're in Matthew 6, flip over to chapter 4. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 4, it says, "Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry." Understatement. All right? So here's what we know. At this point in the life of Jesus, right, at this point in his ministry, he hasn't gone public yet. So for 30 years, I mean, he's been within synagogues, he's had discussions, he's lived a perfect life, but he hasn't stepped onto the scene in a public way for his ministry, right? So at this point, this is kind of a turning point in his life. For the next 3 years, he's going to be journeying towards the cross. He knows that he has a work that God has called him towards, right? So for him, what he knows is God has a work for him to do. And the only way that he's going to make it through is through a posture of complete dependence on his Father. So he's like, God has given me this work to work towards the cross, to undo everything that Adam and Eve broke, to make all wrongs right, to set the trajectory of history towards redemption and restoration. Like, I have to be faithful to God, and I have a work to do, but the only way that I'm going to sustain, the only way I'm not going to fold, the only way that I'm going to run this task to completion is through God's power. So he postures himself with complete dependence on God through what? Through fasting. So before he begins his public ministry, Jesus fasts so that he can have God's power for God's work. Think of this. Think like this. Jesus brought his body to a place of physical weakness so his heart could be brought to a place of spiritual strength. All right, so Jesus, for 40 days and 40 nights, he fasts so that his body would be brought to a place of physical weakness and his heart be brought to a place of spiritual strength. Then look at verses 3 and 4. After this, it says, "And the tempter came and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread.' But he answered, 'It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" And so you need to know is when God has called you to a work, like when there is a work that God has given you that you can only complete through God's power, Satan is going to want to knock you off course. He's going to want to pull you away from the work that God has called you to do. And so as Satan is trying to knock Jesus off course, how does he respond? He says, we don't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And so what we see here is just as you need bread or food for physical strength, you need God for spiritual strength. I remember the first time I heard a theologian talk about the Lord's Prayer where he said, when you pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." He said, yes, thank God for physical provision, but also remember that in the same way that you need physical food for physical strength, you need Jesus, the bread of life, for spiritual strength. And so as you're praying for daily bread, think about it like you need Christ, all right? And so in the same way that you need bread or food for physical strength, you need God for spiritual strength. So Jesus is seeking God for spiritual strength to complete the work that God has called him towards in the midst of Satan continually trying to knock him off course. All right, so what does this mean for us? I've got a buddy who purchased a C8 Corvette. It's sweet. Like when my son Wick got baptized, like he was like, "You want to go ride in the vet?" Like it was like he's like, "This is the coolest day ever because you got baptized, right?" He's like, "Yeah." And I rode around in a Corvette. But what's crazy is when you buy a Corvette, you get access to a driving course in Las Vegas, where it's like you have to be an owner of a Corvette, but you can go to Las Vegas and they will teach you how to drive the Corvette as fast as possible, right? And so he goes down to Vegas to learn how to drive his Corvette as fast as possible. And so you think like, let's do this. Like we're gonna go there, we're gonna put pedal to the metal, we're gonna go and it's gonna be awesome and there's gonna be so much speed and it's gonna be invigorating. But they spent hours in a class learning how to brake. Think about that. Like you're like, let's do this. Like give me the helmet. Let's rev up the car. Let's go. And they're like, you need to learn how to use the brakes. You're like what? Like no, the gas pedal, the right pedal, that one. Like no. Braking. And so here's what they show is for you to make it through a course, right? Like where there's turns and twists and straightaways, for you to make it through as fast as possible, you have to master braking. And so as you're coming to the turn, there's about to be a shift, you've got to get on the brake at the right time. So it's very intentional. And so you get on the brake as you enter into the turn, and then as you come around it, and when you start to hit the brake, what does the nose of the car do? Like it starts coming down. So then you have to wait. So you've slowed down, your nose is down, then you wait, and once that nose levels off, and resets, now you're ready to punch it and then to go faster. But to make it through the course faster, to power through the course at a greater speed, you have to know how to brake, right? And so I say that because God has a work to do in and through Redeemer. And I truly believe the vast majority of this room is called to be an important puzzle or an important piece to that puzzle. But the only way for us to power through, right? And if you go into that turn and the Corvette wrong, you know what happens? You spin out, right? So the only way for us to power through and to not spin out is through operating in God's strength. And so as we enter, like I said, not just this season, but for many years to come, it's like there's this turn in the life of our church happening right now. And as we enter this turn and head towards the next straightaway, fasting is a way for us to get on the brakes. Fasting is a way for us to slow down and to level out so that when we get to that straightaway, we're ready to run ahead. All right, so that brings me to the final thing, which is how do we fast? How if we're going to do this, and this is where I could build a case to show you here's what it is, here's why we do it, but then it's like, well, how do I do that, Jeff? Like, don't just tell me we're fasting and then leave me to it. Like, I need to know. Give me the deets. All right, let me ask you this before we dive into how. Let me ask you this. Be honest with yourself and don't answer out loud. How are you doing in your walk with God right now? Like, how's your prayer life? When I think about the people around Redeemer, some people are prayer warriors, and for them, it's almost like you feel like they've got a direct line to God. You get customer service, but they have the bat signal, and you're like, this person. A lot of us, though, I think our prayer life is kind of sporadic, right? It's like you pray a few times a week, you pray at meals, but it's not rhythmic. And then some of you are like, I pray when life falls apart. That's about it. And that's probably reflective of how your relationship with God's doing, I would say. And so how's your relationship with God? Okay, so think about this. I'm not a pharmacist. Did not go to school. Others did. This is where I say an illustration afterwards, you come and correct me. If there's a prescription that says QID, is that quit or just QID? 4 times a day. All right, but if I said, it's not quid. All right, so QID means you're going to take the prescription 4 times a day. All right. Now, what if it's followed up with Q6H? Every 6 hours. All right, so it's an illustration. If I received a medication and they're saying, take this 4 times a day, 6 hours apart, this is what's gonna happen. I would take it that morning and then I would forget. And I'd be going to bed and I'd look at that bottle of pills and I'd go, I gotta take 3 right now. And I'm pretty sure they're designed in such a way that they break down at a certain level. So that would be bad, right? So for me, if I'm gonna make it through a round of drugs that I need to take, 4 times a day, 6 hours apart, you know what I'm gonna do? Hey Siri, set timer 4 times, 6 hours apart. I'm gonna tell you, then every 6 hours when it gives me that annoying alarm, like doot, 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 I'm like, oh yeah. And what happens? I'm cued in, I need to take my medicine. Right? It's a cue that helps me to know it's time to take my medicine. Now, with that in mind, all right, how do we fast? Okay, well, here's our working definition. Abstaining from something you physically want, so you're drawn deeper into what you spiritually need. So the first part of that is abstaining from something you physically want, right? And so how do you fast? You think through what's something that I physically go to on a regular basis that I can give up for a period of time. Okay, and so for some people, it's an absolute fast. People will give up water and food for a period of time, a day, 3 days, a week. I've had friends say they've done it for 40 days. I don't know how, but you're just like, I'm going to completely give it up. You would call that a supernatural fast. That's something that God works through supernaturally. It's dangerous. You want to be smart about it. Like I fasted for seven days one time, and I was like, it says don't let people know you're fasting. Don't look miserable. So my buddy's like, do you want to go play basketball? And I'm like, don't let them know I'm fasting. I guess so. Like, and I'm out there running through the court, like dying. I hadn't eaten food in 5 days, so all that to say, don't do that. That's not a smart idea. But another way of doing it is you might give up certain types of food. That would be more like the Daniel fast, where you're saying, okay, like for this period of time, I'm going to give up meat. I'm gonna go vegan. I'm gonna go vegetarian. I'm just gonna eat vegetables for X amount of days. So you might give up just something that you go to for. So some people might give up coffee. You're like, Jeff, I'm pounding 4 to 5 cups of coffee a day. I'm gonna walk away from that. Or maybe for you it's Diet Coke, and you're like, no, I read that this changes my genetics, and so got to stay away from that. But you give up something that you physically want. So for you need to think through, what is that thing? It could be social media. I mean, how rhythmic are we at opening up our phones and immediately going to an app? Open up your phone in the morning, it's like you wake up, your eyes are like, I wonder what's happened on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or Threads or TikTok or whatever people go to, right? And so maybe for you, it's like, I'm gonna give up social media. Or maybe for you, it's news. Like one of my buddies gave up news, and it's like, so for you, maybe you're like, man, I constantly go to Fox News, to CNN, to Al Jazeera, or I watch the news, and I'm constantly taking it in, and I just need to, I'm gonna step aside from that for a while. But whatever it might be for you, it's giving up something that you physically want. All right, that's the first part, giving up something you physically want, so you're drawn deeper into what you spiritually need. So here's what happens. When you open up your phone, if you're giving up social media, and you begin that process of going to that app, that's like your alarm on your phone reminding you to take medication. That's your alarm where you say, I need to go to God instead. I need to go to God instead. And so what happens is over the course, I want to get my cup of coffee. And you're like, all right, I'm going to go to God instead, right? And so what happens is throughout the day, as you begin to crave these physical things, because you're giving up something that you physically want, when you want to go to that thing, you turn to God. And that could be a multiple different ways. Like, if you ever read the book of Nehemiah, one of the coolest things about this book is Nehemiah has some really long prayers that are incredible, where he has adoration, and he has confession and thanksgiving and supplication. It's like perfect model prayer in Nehemiah, but other times it's what I would call a breath prayer. So in my Bible, in Nehemiah, I have a bunch of just BPs written down. And every time I see a breath prayer, that's just a simple, what you can say a prayer in one breath. God, I need your help in this. Like that's all, that's it. Like, so for some people, like when you go to, like you have that physical craving, sometimes you go to God with a breath prayer. God, I need your help to fight this temptation for sin. God, I need your strength for today. Sometimes you would go 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Sometimes you can go much longer than that. I would say it's healthy to have times where you go deep in your prayer, and it's also perfectly okay just to throw up a breath prayer. So don't think that every time that you have that craving that you have to go sit down for 30 minutes in prayer. It's like you might, because that's derailed some people where they're like, I don't have time. Like if I'm craving food in the middle of the workday, I can't just walk away from my work for the next hour and spend time in prayer. I think having deep times of prayer is awesome, and I want you to do that, but it's perfectly fine when a craving sets in just to throw up a breath prayer. Case in point, Nehemiah. He's a great example in Scripture for us to follow, so if he did it, we can do it too. Okay, then here's what happens, right? As you begin this rhythm of having physical cravings, but taking those cravings as a cue to go to God and to seek him in prayer, listen to this in verse 6 of chapter 6. Jesus says, but when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And then in verse 18, he says, and your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. You see, fasting in a way that draws you to God in prayer helps you to live in that secret place of God's presence in your life. Right? And so as you begin to live in that secret place of God's presence in your life, you will find yourself growing deeper in your relationship with God, and you will find yourself experiencing more of his power in your life to accomplish the work that he has called you to do. And so for the next few weeks, we're going to unpack what we're running after as a church. And I want to call us as a church to give up something that we physically want so that we can be drawn deeper into what we spiritually need, so that you can know, hey, is this what God is calling me to as well? Is this a work that I'm a part of that God is going to do in and through this church to push his kingdom forward into our world? And so if you want to know that with clarity, and if you want to be ready and filled up for the work that will come right after this, would you join me for fasting? So we're going to start on August 14th. That gives you a week to think through what you want to give up. So I'm not just throwing it on you today. Don't worry, like tomorrow, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. You've got time. But on the 14th, we're going to start fasting, and we're going to fast all the way through the first Saturday of September, and then we'll go from there into opening the doors and running. God, thank you for the time to talk about fasting and just seeing Jesus, God, his personal example as he began his public ministry in Matthew 4, and seeing his instructions in Matthew 6 to his disciples, that it's a when you do, not a if you do. And so God, for some, I know this is going to be the first time that they fast. And God, I ask that you would be with them and help them to make it through in a way that it's not a mental grind, but it's something beautiful and something that leaves them longing to do it again. God, for others, there are people who feel pretty seasoned in this. And God, I just ask that you would bless their fast as well, and give them something new. Help them to see you from an angle they haven't yet seen you from, to be reminded that you are infinitely bigger than we could ever imagine, infinitely more beautiful than we could ever imagine. And God, I ask that you'd be with us as a church, that this would be a season of us truly going deeper with you, experiencing and being filled with your power, so that we're ready and equipped to move forward in the work that you've called us to do. So God, thank you. We ask for your blessings. In your name we pray. Amen.